This is episode number 3 of the Redis series. In the previous 2 episodes, we went over installing pRedis and PHP Redis in Laravel. In this episode, though, we're going to take a look at storing views for articles or pages, any kind of page really. And then we're going to take that one step further and create a list where we can give a score to each page or article. So that way we know which one has the most views, and then we can go on our home page and display that list from most views to least views, or like display the top 5 biggest articles or whatever you want. So let's go ahead and get started. I am in my routes.php here, and if you remember, this looks the same as in the last episode, except I changed this. In the previous one, where we were using PHP Redis, I was using Redis to not conflict with the PHP Redis class. But I've switched back to pRedis because I'm assuming most of you are going to be using pRedis. All right, now keep in mind that the functions I'm going to use in this video are going to be the same for PHP Redis or pRedis. They're not going to be different at all, so it doesn't matter what you have, this will still work. I've tested it. If you run into any issues, please let me know, but I've tested most of this, so it should work. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the default route that came with Laravel when I first installed it. And so I want to display the welcome controller at index, call the index function whenever we load this path right here. And then I'm also going to create a second one that is going to call blog controller, and we're going to show article. Okay, so when we type in and go to article / and then give an ID number, and then I'm also going to add a where clause where ID must be numerical. All right, so now we've got these two here, these two routes, and I'm going to start with the block controller route. So we're going to go in our controllers here, and I'm just going to add a new controller and going to copy the welcome one. And by the way, for this episode, I'm not going to worry about aesthetics. I'm just going to do the logic, and you can take care of the aesthetics. I'm also going to be including everything in here, whereas in your application you would want to separate into models and views instead of putting everything in your controllers. That's just not scalable, and it's not good practice at all. So now that we have our new controller, which I forgot to rename to block controller, I'm going to save that. Okay. All right, now we need to pass in Redis, right? We need to have access to Redis in our block controller, more specifically in our show article function. But also, we need to pass in the ID that the user has either clicked in or manually typed in, or whatever it is. And so the first step that we're going to take is we're going to declare a variable. I'm going to call it storage, and it's going to call a Redis connection. Now, this is not going to work because we need the name path, which is going to be illuminate support facades Redis. Okay, so now it should work, and you can test it just by printing the result of storage if you want. But I'm going to move forward, and just every time that this article is loaded, I want to increment a new view count. Okay, so we have Redis loaded already, and I'm going to call a function increment on Redis, which is stored in our variable storage. That's, if you remember from previous episodes, that's the singleton is binded to the Redis alias, and that's why we're able to communicate with it via a static method called connection. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we need to have a key and a value. That's how something like NoSQL works, and this is what Redis is. It's very similar to NoSQL, where you have a key and a value. And so our key needs to be unique. I'm going to do this by using the ID. So I'm going to do article colon and then put ID and then colon views. The reason I'm putting article colon and then again colon views is that way we can easily filter out article and views if we need to in our application. And we'll see this later because we will need to do this in a moment. All right, so now we have this. Let's go ahead and return just a string and then pass in the ID. Okay, and it has X views. Okay, has views. All right, I forgot my period here. Otherwise we'll have a syntax error. And then I need to store this result in views because it's going to increment it and then return the value that's been incremented to. Okay, so let's give this a shot. Let's see if this works. So let me refresh this. And we have this is the default one. Now we're going to do article 1. This is an article with ID 1. It has one view. Now if I refresh it again and again and again and again and again, as you see, it's incrementing every time. Okay, so this is how Redis increment is going to work. Please keep in mind, these are not unique views. Do keep that in mind when you keep a record of your views. This is not unique. This is every time the page loads, it will increment the value. All right, so, and by the way, we can check this in the Redis command line as well. New keys. You'll see article, and it will return the number of views. Okay, so this will work for any of them as well. If I do article 4, again, it starts from scratch and it keeps going, and this will work for any ID that's numerical. All right, so what if we want to keep that score list that I was talking about earlier? What if we want on our homepage here to have a list of the top 3 articles that have the most views? Right, this is pretty popular on some sites, and you might want to have that too. So we're going to have to change this. We can't just use set and get. We're going to have to use a sorted set that keeps track of scores. So let's go ahead and change this out. And we're going to have to use a function called z-increment by. Okay, so instead of using this increment here, we're going to replace this with z-increment by. And we're going to have to name this list, which is going to be our key. So I'm going to call it article views. Okay, and then the z-increment by requires an increment number. How much is going to increment by every time we increment? And we just want to add one view, so we're going to increment by 1, but you can do anything here you want. So this is useful for all kinds of things, keeping score maybe in a game or upvotes, like on StackOverflow. If somebody gives 5 points, you would increment this by 5 instead of 1. Whereas if they upvote one time, then you would just add 1, etc. So this is useful for all kinds of applications. And then we need to pass in the article ID. Okay. So I'm not going to add the views in here because this is going to be unique anyway. And that way we can get it back easier without filtering as much. So this will work great. And we can test it by going to article 2. Has 1 views, 2 views, 3 views, and then we're going to do article 1 again, because even though it had views, we didn't have this yet. So let's get keys and see, and you'll see that there's an article views that we just added in. And if we do z-range article views, and I want all of the keys returned, you'll see that it started to populate the list. And if I go to another article again, then it will add that one as well. So if I do again z-range, you'll see it has article 3, 1, and 2, and it's keeping score. So that we see that works great. The only problem is, and I want to include this in case you already have some kind of view incrementer, but you're not using a list and you would like to merge to a list, you'll run into an issue because you're not going to have the same view counts between the increment and the z increment by, right? This started incrementing later than this one, so you're not going to have the accurate count in the z increment by. And so what we can do is we can use an if statement that checks if we already have a z score for that particular ID, and if we don't, then we want to set it to the result of the increment. Let me just show you. It might make more sense if I show it to you. So we can do this by calling storage z score article views, because we're pulling it from the article views set, and then we're going to call the ID, which is ID. Okay, so if we get a result from this check, if we get a score back, then that means it's already set, and all we have to do is just increment this by 1. However, if we don't, then I want to take this result and then I want to increment this by that result views. Okay, because remember, increment returns the result of the new increment value, and so that's what we want to set it to. But we only want to set it to that if we don't already have a z-score value, else it's going to increment by the number of views we already have, which is exactly what we don't want. Okay, so, but this is not necessary if you're just starting this application from scratch or just starting to track views. If we just run this as is, we'll actually run into an error when only this block is executed, because then we won't have access to a views variable. So we need to put this out of the if-else block and replace this with get. So we just get the number back, we don't increment. This is the increment is being taken care of up here. So we just want to return the result. So you may have noticed that we replaced increment with z increment by. But there may be a case where maybe you'd want to use both increment and z increment by. And so today I want to introduce you to a pipeline. You may have already heard of it, but if not, it's pretty important to understand if you're going to send a lot of commands to the Redis server, because you don't want it to have multiple round trips. So you don't want to send one command and then get a response back and then send another command, get a response back, etc. If you have commands that you want to send at once and execute at the same time and then give you a result, then pipeline can really help with performance. So let's go ahead and walk through this example by using both increment and z increment by. And we're going to keep these if-else blocks. All I'm going to do in here is add a pipeline like so. And I'm going to take this guy replace this with pipe, and then we're just going to do the same thing with increments. And I missed a thing. Okay. One problem with this though is we're not going to have access to this ID right here. So what I'm going to do up here is just set it like so, and then replace this, or these two actually, with this ID. And now we'll have access to it. And if you want, you can even go through the rest of these and replace them as well. Yeah. Actually didn't meant to do that here. Okay. So now the way this is going to work is, if we're in this block here, we want to increment by in our sorted set, and we also want to increment here at the same time. Send all these commands, both of these commands at the same time, and then get the response back. Like I said, this can save a lot of round trips if you have a lot of commands you want to send. Like, this is a pretty basic example, and may not even make sense for most applications, but it's just to show you the concept of it. So let me just make sure that all this is running properly. We're going to go here and just refresh it, and it is working properly. Okay, so now let's move on to the main page that we want to display the top voted or the top viewed articles that we have in our database. And the way we're going to do that is by, first of all, replacing this and just adding the connection to Redis again. And then we're going to fetch our sorted set results. I'm just going to name a variable called popular. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function called reverse range, because if you just do z range, it's going to return the opposite. You're going to get the least popular at the top and the most popular at the bottom, which is not what we want. We want the reverse of that. So you do it like this, article views, and then you can pass in two different commands here, two different methods. You have one that's going to be 0 because that's the index you want to start at, and -1, which is basically saying all of the results. And you can change this to however many results you want, and we'll play around with that after we prove that this works. And then what I'm going to do is just make a for each loop. And inside of here, I'm going to have the popular, and then I really just need a value here. So we can now go inside and do our ID equals article. Oh, whoops, actually. The way this is going to work is, since we have article 1, this is the key here, I really just want to return the ID of the article. And so we're going to have to filter out this from the result that we get. And there's a simple string replace function in PHP that does it, that helps out a lot with this kind of stuff. And so we're just going to filter out the article : and replace it with just an empty blank space. Whoops. And then the subject is going to be our value. So now we have our ID of the article. We can just echo it. Is popular, and we're just going to break here. And you know what? I actually just realized that we're missing the namespace for Redis. So that's going to give us an error. Let's add it up here so it knows where to find it. And then if we give it a shot, go to our main page, there we have the list from most popular to least popular of our articles. And if we go in here and we change this to 2, then we'll get the top 3, because index starts at 0. So we'll get the top 3, and if you want the top 2, etc., you can keep reducing this over and over again. So I hope that after watching this episode of the series, that you get a much better understanding of how keys and values start to work, or how keys and values work in Redis, and how you can use them to store things like this. I mean, just stop for a minute and think about what it would take to implement this in something like a MySQL database or any relational database. You know, you'd have to have a table, and you'd have to have the relationships in place, foreign keys and all that. But not only that, but also every time somebody loads a page like this, or goes to Redis, article, and then goes to a page like this, every time it does that, not only does it have to fetch the result of how many views you currently have in the database, that's one read, and then you increment that, and then you write it to the database again, and you do that every time somebody loads a page. If you have, over time, even if you don't have that much traffic, this adds up to thousands and thousands of reads and writes to your database and therefore to your disk, which can instead be offloaded to memory with Redis. And it takes so little space in memory that, unless you get huge and you have a massive amount of articles or pages, then you're not going to run out of memory anytime soon just by storing view counts. So I hope that you start to understand and grasp the meaning of the power in something like Redis. Now, in the next few episodes, we're going to learn how to store sessions and also how to store tags. Like, let's say you want to tag an article. Maybe it's an article on laptops, or maybe it's a review on, a coffee maker or something like that. You want to have tags so people can quickly sift through your different articles and that sort of thing. And it also shows you how to manage different data types, because we're going to look at just regular sets instead of stored sets, may even look at hashes, that kind of thing. So stay tuned, and please let me know in the comments if you like this sort of format, or if there's anything that bothers you, or if I'm going too fast or too slow. Please give me some feedback so I can keep making these as good as possible. And thank you all for watching.